Welcome back to I Know a Guy Bicycles, hanging out with the guy. Hey, I'm Justin the Guy. This is the As the Wheel Turns, So the Days of Our Ride series of industry news and insights for consumers like yourself. And I forgot a light. There we go. And other topics that we're going to talk about and go forward with. It's one of those situations where you can interact. I figured opportunity to throw something in the chat. I can answer those questions or any particular insights and so forth. But today's topic, we're going to talk about weather. Yeah, you know, I'm an old dude, and old people like to talk about weather. You know, either it relates to their garden or whatever. I remember back in the day, like my grandfather would go down to the little kind of like donut shop diner, and they'd meet up with all the other farmers, and they'd just talk about weather and so forth. Well, that's where I understood where weather impact as a small child and relates to even what today's impacts. And how do you not, I mean, if you live on planet Earth, you got weather, right? So you're not on a decimal planet trying to ride your bike or a moon. So here we are, and we have weather to contend with. And it's one of those things that could be a great benefit. Also, it could be very devastating. From beautiful days on San Diego Beach and riding with with the wind in the hair and a light ocean spray in your face to, oh crap, we got wind tunnel type winds, crosswinds, and what could be unsafe to actually ride in. So when you're looking at all those different things, it's pretty huge. And when you look at business day-to-day model, that's pretty big too. From the micro shop like myself to the bigger industries where there's chains. You know, I worked at Big Five Sporting Goods where weather was a matrix that we would put in every day, you know, and they would have that as a barometer of actual business and so forth. And where those particular things gave them insights. Well, what kind of insights are those? You know, like, should we plan sales or inventory planning for particular areas, or the big chains, like what we, you know, we're not going to put parkas and snow equipment in San Diego, and we're not going to put swimsuits in Michigan in the wintertime. So you got all those kinds of things going on. And but you know, it's one of those deals where, you know, the weather is a huge factor. Good morning, Sadie. Yeah, Shady. What we're looking at is, you know, the weather and things that affect that. It's like, well, specifically, there's going to be two topics I'm going to cover on this morning, and one is the industry version of it, and what's going to be a personal effect, you know, that kind of thing. So actually, I had to write some notes. So I'm going to start off. You know, it's like the local shops, mom and pop shops myself, even like the Trek chain stores type things, that kind of thing. Morning, vaping. So it's one of those things where in Colorado, we have a lot of weather, and a lot of it's good because you could have like a nice warm day in January and February and go ride your bike because the snow melted, because we don't have a cumulative snow here in the Front Range anyway in Colorado. The mountains are a different story, but we're in the Front Range. We're on the backside of that. So you can have those good days. You also could have you know, it's like one of those things where weather could make or break your business. So when we're looking like in March and April and trying to get ready for the season, those particular things where you can have snow on a Wednesday, but yet on the weekend, if it's nice, you still capture those sales and service. If it snows on that Saturday and Sunday is crappy and gray, but it's nice on Wednesday, it's going to really temper those sales. So when you look at the micro level, that, you know, really affects our little market here. When you're looking at colder and average temperatures like we've had this year, and that's going to be the hot topic in that situation. And oh, Shady's in Australia. Hey, welcome to Down Under. It must be tomorrow for you. So happy Monday morning. Anyway, so the weather, and even this is globally, right? It's like you have your off seasons, your on seasons, the weekends, and depending what your micro weather events actually affects all those things. And when you're looking at a business from Colorado to Florida to South California to Alaska even, weather has all those aspects and it actually drives our business. Well, those consistent weather kind of years and patterns really kind of help us. Well, it forms our business, right? And it forms when we bring in winter products, summer products, and all those things. Well, what happens when things get shifted drastically? Like this year, we're colder than average temperatures up here in the States in the lower half. We had colder temperatures all the way through June. And that tempered the sales of bikes on top of surplus, but that actually was not a helping variable for industry at all. And then July hit, we got really busy, and we're still a little busy going through August, but is it going to be enough to offset those 9 months of really bad sales and cold weather to boot? It may take a year or two to kind of offset that. And as in big scaling up to the big boys like Trek, Specialized, and Giant, it's going to take a little bit longer to drive those sales. I mean, they have some aces in their pockets, like Specialized pulling out a new model of bike, or they'll have the e-bike thing is becoming more huge, and you got those things like the gravel bikes, or once they get those on the market, people are still looking for those. So they have some aces in the hole for those particular bumps, but it's down to the nitty gritty and brass taxes of doing the work, right? So, as bike shops go, you diversify. Myself, I wasn't doing service for a while because I was just focusing on refurbishing road bikes. Now I brought back service. I figured out how I can mix that into my mold so it doesn't interfere or become detrimental of one to the other. And I found that mix and I made it happen. Well, because I had to. So micro level to a bigger shop, more things need to go on. Like a couple shops built some YouTube channels, I've noticed. They're fairly new, but man, they are cranking out videos like I was at first. Because I saw this back in November going, things are slow. I need to figure out something to help me offset business, right? And also validate or make my shop more legit in a sense. Like, you're buying a bike from a guy in a garage. I mean, how weird is that? I would think in my head, but it's become a warm hug from a lot of people. So they're fine with it, especially once they meet me in person or see the videos. That's where the thing is. I've always had a good rapport with individuals and selling them in person. So I figured the YouTube thing would help. So talking about other shops and leveraging that to get their name out, their branding, and more larger perspectives and diversifying. That's what weather is part of that thing that drove that. Another weather event that drove us is seasonality in the 90s, where we started like, well, we need to start renting snowboards and skis, see if that works. That definitely helped offset the off season. So, right now down in Australia, if you're close to the ski hill, you're like, we're getting close to wrapping up our season and so forth. And I can't imagine Christmas being warm, but anywho, it's just one of those things that the seasonality is dictating our business to some level and degree. We just can't just go willy-nilly and go crazy. So back to the thought of affecting the shops. Also, what does that affect? Events. I mean, people think about events, right? Like, oh, well, one event we signed up for was kind of a fun little inflatable course of kind of like, what was it? Like the Tough Mudder or one of those events, but it was like inflatables. You just jump through all these inflatables. It sounded like a great time, and this was scheduled in April. I'm like, it'd be fine, and it'd be April. Signed up for it. It snowed. It canceled, and we didn't get refunded. It was kind of like, whatever, it just kind of died. But that was an event. They had all these people sign up. You're talking about race events, weather. One that was really bad for me was I was doing the MS-150, which I'm really, my family and I have been part of the MS-150. It's a charity ride here in the States where it's a 2-day event, and they have these all across the nation in different states too. So Colorado's version, my family have been a part of that since late 80s. And through the whole Parker Bikes area, we would have this event and we would do it, and it became really my dad's passion. And after he passed away, I kind of took up that passion, and I don't do the level that he does. He was part of the organization of shops and so forth. I just get my crew together and we do the event, but that's still very beneficial because they're really always short on people helping out. But the weather, going back to the weather, one of the first ones that after my dad passed away that I did a rover, which means basically you just kind of drive around, you help people out, kind of deal. I was like the extra person, and it rained like that. Consistent rain all day, and people were really not prepared for it. And that kind of event, they're not race teams, they're just novice riders raising money to help with MS or that kind of thing, a charity ride. And it was kind of a mess. I mean, I never seen so many people rovered, like picked up, sagged. Sagged, and mechanical issues, flats, all those kinds of things. It was a mess the first day of the event, and I had to actually cut the course, shut the course down through part of it because the lightning started up. So depending like where you're at, weather is a big kind of issue of weather, tornadoes. We have a little more extremes here. It's not just rain, like the drizzle rain of like Seattle, that kind of thing. It's a little more impactful. So it's those things where, oh, I see some clouds boil up, I better scoot home because I don't want to be caught in a hailstorm or lightning strikes and that kind of thing. So when you look at those events, that really tempers that experience for a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of those people are like, I'll never do that again. It's like, unfortunately, a lot of people did, which is great. But that actually pulls people out of that particular industry. Bad event, a lot of those are newbies. They borrowed a bike, it's one of those things, and they're like, oh, that was horrible. Or they can have a great experience when it's sunny and nice and perfectly calm, and they have great experiences, and then that could make themselves get into that particular, cycling or mountain climbing or whatever event that is. So weather has those impacts, and when you're looking at those events, it's pretty huge. It's bigger scale than a lot of people think. They're just thinking at the moment, in the moment, like, oh, it's raining, we got to protect our riders, we got to protect our staff, all that kind of things. But when it comes to longevity of that sport, that's huge impact. So back to like bike shops or any outdoor sports, yeah, weather is a huge thing. And when you're looking at events, you got races, you got rides, and here's a gold nugget. So Colorado history here lesson in 2013, on Friday the 13th in September, this guy was getting married. Well, that's a significant day in Colorado history. Why? Massive flooding in September. Huge. It was like one of those crazy events where it rained several days in a row, which was abnormal for September here. And there was a flood that took out the Thompson, which goes down through Loveland, where I live, took out bridges. And there was the Pooter, which flooded on the north side of Fort Collins. So the demographics is, we were in Loveland, Fort Collins area, got a flood on one side, another one on the other, and basically made Fort Collins an island for a day. It could not get in. They closed the roads. Half of our people couldn't make it. A lot of people just made it to Denver airport, couldn't drive up because the roads were closed. So unfortunately, our wedding was like half the people. We still had a great time. We made it work, and the day turned out to be nice, but the flooding was still happening. Weather event. Totally made ours memorable. And this is the kicker. My wife's an atmospheric scientist. She does drought. And she had a lot of her atmospheric science friends there. So it's kind of like, oh, so the running joke was we had too many of them there, caused a weird event. So don't have too many weather people at any of your events because things will happen. Just kidding. But that was kind of like one of those things where that weather affects. And when you're looking at all those kinds of things with the industry, they're like, I've mentioned this before, it's like a line of Titanics. They're like, we hope there's not an iceberg. And the Titanic, they had at least one good run, I think. I don't think it was our main voyage they crashed. I could be totally wrong. But it's one of those things where, there's those variables out there, and you don't know how big they are. And the big corporations, they can't move that Titanic fast enough. It's just not like a speedboat. And think of me as being like a little jet ski, like, woo, I'm gonna get out of the way, as a business analogy. They are on a big boat and there's a line of them. And one crashes, they just like 10 of them crash before one finally gets out of the way, kind of thing. So when you're looking at weather, yes, they do take perspectives of weather, especially if it's like trucker specialized. They're moving a store into a location, or they're looking at it and they purchased the store. They're going to try to get all those dynamics of what weather is going to affect the business, their high, lows, peak valleys, and so forth, to make decisions of what they're going to stock the stores with. So when you're looking at that, yeah, it's a big push of trying to figure out what's the average temperatures at this particular time. Granted, there might be anomalies of like warmer than average, colder than average, that kind of thing. So, it's one of those things is the weather is just, huge. And for big corporations, it's hard for them to do those changes and so forth. And it's like living with the atmospheric scientists, I got a lot more insights than just the old guy watching the Weather Channel. It's like you see all this historical data points and all this, and how can that be applied to retail and forecasting? It's like, well, you can have particular averages and so forth to gauge all those events and so forth. So we're kind of working on kind of a concept on that, like events and business profiling and so forth of those areas. But so what does that come down to? Your weather kind of dictates sales, right? When you're looking at the retail portion of it. Well, what kind of sales are we talking about? Well, the change of seasons is one. The smart trainers have been a huge insurgence of winter sales just for cycling for the last 7-8 years now. And that's really one of those things where it's kind of gotten people back on their bike in the wintertime and made it more fun, because the highway to nowhere was highway to nowhere, and it was really hard to be motivated just to get on that trainer bike and just, okay, flip the page of the book, to keep those legs going. But those smart trainers have really helped out. The weather, it was really cool in the 90s. There was kind of a big, huge insurgence of clothing and cycling clothing, and they were playing with like Gore-Tex and windproof and all that kind of stuff. So that also lengthened your ride and also gave opportunity for shops to like, oh, you want rain jackets and, lot more than that, just, layers to keep you warm, thermal layers. I still have some of that stuff today. And, you can really, I think the coldest I've ridden was probably like 15 degrees. You got to worry about your breathing because I have a little bit of asthma, but it's one of those things where if you get it covered right and so forth, you can lengthen. Yeah, it's a bigger ordeal. It's not just like throwing on a jerseys and shorts and shoes, which is sometimes a big enough ordeal to, have I really want to do that today? Then when you add like, okay, I need to add like 3 more layers. I need to put Vaseline around my eyes, and I gotta, get some heat warm, pockets to put in my back, keep, circulation, all that. So, it's a little more of a planned event, but you go out there and you do it, and it's kind of like that back in the schools, like man against nature kind of thing. So it's like, and they were fun. I mean, you get out there and you hear the crispiness of your tires on the gravel and the road or whatever. It's just a different experience. And in some shops, I've worked in one in Wheels Motion or in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they had this worst day of the year ride, and I think it was February. So, yeah, I asked them about a carbon repair. Yeah, I haven't done any carbon repair yet. I haven't played with that yet. I saw some videos. Think I might get into it, but I've been so busy. I do have a handful of carbons with small patches I'm going to try, but I will produce videos on that, just a sidebar. Thanks for the question, for sure. And also, that's another thing in weather. For me, I don't have a heated garage, so when you cure carbon, I had to do it like in July and August because you got to have higher temperatures for it to sit for 24 hours. So you can't do it in the wintertime for me because like the garage is too cold. So if I was thinking like that, it's like, oh, I should do that. It's like, Oh, well, I was too busy in the summer. So this winter, I'm gonna like do some more research on it, get the materials, and maybe prep the frame. So I'm kind of just ready to go when the temperatures get warm again for next season. So, good question. And again, it does relate to weather. On that, oh, where was I? But yeah, so products mixes go in. A lot of shops will switch over to winter gear if they're closer to, the hills, snowboarding, that kind of thing. And it's one of those deals where it's just constantly changing and adapting for businesses, that kind of thing. So that kind of covers the highlights of like the industry type. But when you're looking at personal, like a lot of your viewers that I have, a lot of my subscribers, you guys are just a few of you are from shops, but some of you are like, oh, I do a lot of riding. I like riding and I like watching this old guy talk about bikes. So if you're new into the sport, you get excited and you think colder temperatures, like I talked about, gear. You can get nicer jackets, helmet covers, shoe covers, arm warmers, all those kinds of things, and bike shops will help you kind of guide you through that. Or I'm sure there's a lot of equipment videos out there you can watch, and you can buy those particular products online to extend your riding, to be prepared for those events. And there's a lot of products out there, and they've just been getting better over time, and the prices have gone down, especially they're overstocked on a lot of stuff now. So that's an opportunity. So here's a kicker about cycling clothing, apparel, helmets, well, not helmets, but shoes. A lot of that stuff does not wear out. I mean, like I said, I still have some rain jackets and so forth and colder weather gear that are 20 years old. I can still use those today. Yeah, they're kind of dated colors, but they're still functional. And you don't have to buy them every season. So if you're like a runner or you're in the running, you go through a pair of shoes every 6 months or 3 months, depending on how much you run. For cycling shoes, they don't hardly ever wear out. And that goes the same thing for investment in saddles, that kind of deal. And when you're looking, the weather, you can actually extend. In Colorado, you can pretty much ride year round. I mean, granted, there's a few days of snowpack and so forth on the roads and so forth, but here it melts off. And then you can get back on the paths and do some riding. And locally here in Loveland, Fort Collins, they do a great job of snow removal on the paths. That's a big emphasis here. So sometimes I was able to ride on the bike paths and get to work or do things before the roads were even cleared, because they just have it just works out that way. And so it's kind of cool. So when you're looking at personal riding, yeah, you got your gear, and that will help you extend that riding season and so forth. And that does really benefit, especially when it comes to early spring. You want to get off that kicker in the winter, get out of the basement and actually do those rides. Those are available there. And that's part of the change of seasons. So you adapt your schedules. I mean, summers, it's super hot. So you do your rides early in the morning. Well, coming towards fall, the morning sunlight is less and less, and it's a little bit later, and then you have to adapt, and it's cooler. So you either have to wear clothing or wait till later in the afternoon to ride to hit that 70 to 80 temperature range, and then you go from there. So you got the seasonality of just the normal daylight as well as temperatures. Then you have those colder events and so forth. And then they have, of course, bikes. Like the fat bike was really based off of riding in the snow. So you got those as well. So you got that kind of thing. Go back to indoor trainers. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different smart ones out. This might be a great time to buy when it's still warm. Sorry, Australia, you're probably in the heat of it, but they may have a surplus of them because they just kept on pumping out all these things. And indoor trainers is one of those things. I've seen Wahoo kickers, pretty inexpensive. You can pick one up, used or refurbished from a shop, that kind of thing. And the prices, even get this, even Peloton is dropping their prices on a lot of theirs, and they're selling their refurbished ones super cheap too. So if you're into the Peloton cycle kind of thing or looking to get one, you knew they were going to come down. And then they have refurbished ones from corporate. So yeah, that's one of those companies that COVID saved them because they were on their way out, and then they're trying to figure out what to do as well. But you got that indoor option there. for areas where, like in Michigan, it just gets cold and stays cold for a long time, as well as Alaska. Those particular riders are very seasonal in the sense they have like a 3-month window. And I actually worked with a guy, and he was from Alaska, and he was a mechanic at Lee Cycler here in Fort Collins. I forgot his name, but cool guy, really laid back, but he was talking about how the season there was really short, so everybody was really into the outdoor thing where they'd spend a lot of money on their outdoor stuff because they have just a short limited time, plus those check dividends that they got from the oil that they get in like in the springtime. I'm not sure when that actually lands, but it's kind of like another Black Friday for Alaska because those checks hit everybody the same day, and they all run out to spend it. They're like buying TVs and bikes and all sorts of stuff. But back to the sports part, for that particular area, it's just a short window of outdoor activity availability because of, it's Alaska, and they're into it. Huge, really nice bikes, mountain bikes, road bikes, climbing gear, you name it. That's their thing. So you look at just the demographics of where those areas are, and then you have like San Diego where they can ride every day, t-shirt or jersey and shorts, and it's all gravy most of the time, except for that little hurricane that hit them. Crazy. Anyway, also weather personally for a personal rider. What if you're traveling and taking your bike? What if you're going to an event in a different state and you need to look up the weather and what the events. So the event planners usually will have some of that information, or they should, in the sense of like, oh, what should I need? And they'll usually have a packet for you. One of the other ones is like Trek Travel. They have like these tour things everywhere globally. It's kind of cool, expensive, but kind of cool. And obviously they're going to give you a laundry list of things that you need to bring. They're not going to provide everything, but they do provide some, bikes, but you show up with your like gear and stuff like that. So you got to be mindful of those weather-related areas. And if you're going to somewhere in the fall, and they potentially may have more rain, or it's hotter than usually where you're at, or that kind of thing. Those tour and those events are, you gotta be mindful of that and have the proper gear. And I was a guy that's always overpacked, and I did always, too much stuff when I was younger. Now it's kind of like, I'll just get it if I need it. It's like if I need a jacket, I'll just go buy one. I mean, at this point, it's like, and then I have like 5 jackets that I'll probably never wear again. But anyway, it's, I will, but that kind of deal. But weather is just huge, and it's one of those things where it's always impacted. Back to the farmer, I'm going to loop back to that. It's the growing season, and learning that as a young child, listening to my grandfather jibber jabber with all those old farmer buddies. I'm just eating my donut, not paying really too much attention, but weather was really a common theme. And when you work on the farm for a little bit, or I did, you could understand we had to irrigate here. So it's kind of like one of those things that if you got a really good water event, you could take a break for a week or two. But it had to be a good soaker. These little light rainstorms, it just got the ground wet, it just made everything muddy, and it's just like, oh, it just made your job harder. So, weather has a lot of things to, contribute, from farming to cycling to rock climbing to whatever, So I just wanted to bring that up, as we've had some weather events like the Hawaiian fires were caused by winds. We had the Marshall fire here about a little over a year ago. Just very dry and winds, and something sparked it, and it was a complete mess. It was horrible. And in Maui is just, I can't imagine how insane that is. And also I think there's a link that I put in the description about the cycling community is trying to rally and support the 2 bike shops that were lost in that fire. That too. So if you want to read up on that, feel free to. But it's just one of those things where hopefully weather doesn't take out your shop. But it is it was related to that weather event, as well as my wedding. Too bad they didn't have the rain that we had during the wind event there. But But yeah, it's just, it's very impactful. If you live on this planet, you're going to experience it. And being somebody that's in a bike shop, if you're thinking about opening a bike shop, or you're in a bike shop that just only has a few years in, and you're still trying to wrap your head around what weather is going to affect the industry, there's a lot of peaks and valleys to it, and a lot of, some of it is time in the gut, but it is a big factor. Even in the Parker Bikes days in the 90s, we were in a situation where, you got all these bikes, got all this product, it's March, got it all built up, and we were like, we have to have a sale to start paying some invoices in April, like pronto, or we're in trouble. And I came up with the idea, and it's like, well, why don't we do like a sale if it snows more than an inch on that weekend day, will be a certain percentage off. And this is, again, small box shop. We did mailers to the local communities before the internet, so you just kind of really, you got the message out as much as possible. And that's when like those weather event sales became a thing. And sure enough, for we planned this a couple weeks ahead, so we didn't really know exactly, but I think we probably knew it was colder than average or something. And we're like, this will kill us if we don't do it. And man, it snowed, and boom, we were busy. It actually worked. It was amazing. Like, people were coming in, buying bikes and accessories, taking advantage, because what else could they do? Stuck at home with the kids, let's go out and go buy stuff. And it actually worked in our favor in that one. And we did it before, or again after, but it was actually nice on that weekend or whatever, but we still had discounts. But it's like one of those things where if you're a shop owner, you really are affected by those weather patterns and trends and all those things. And when you're looking at individual, that it's a mental state. You're riding, and you're like, you can't start your season early as a personal level. Which when I did the MS 150s at the end of June this year, and a lot of those cats that I was talking to when I was working on their bikes on that event, they were like, we haven't had time to train. It's been too crappy to train. And these are, novice and entry level riders. They're just getting into the sport or just doing this one event. So they don't have all the gear. They don't have the indoor trainer. They don't have all the knowledge to do all that to prep. And you look at that, and it's like, hopefully it wasn't that bad. I mean, they were still having a good time, but it wasn't as bad as that one when it rained the whole day. Going back to that note, but it's one of those things where it's hugely impactful. And if you like your bike shop, and I've mentioned this before, supporting that community, and if you're a bike shop trying to support, like teach people, have clinics on clothing and sales and that kind of, just to keep them inspired and riding later in the season or in weather events and that kind of thing. And as a consumer, try to support your local shops. If they helped you out with a free derailleur adjustment or fixed a flat for you event, that kind of thing, throw them a bone. If it's like, oh, okay, maybe we need to go get some extra tubes or whatever, or I need some colder weather gloves or arm warmers or leg warmers, that kind of thing. So, it's a give and take. We're all a community, right? It's like we need the customers, and the customers need the bike shops, and if you want the bike shops to stay around, that are a little more personable, and the family shops, that kind of thing, it's kind of a give and take. And being in the bike industry for a long time, and being a lot of that in the mom and pop shop version of it versus corporate, which I've done corporate. I did the sporting goods thing, and it's one of those things that the bigger boys, they'll sustain little hiccups, but the smaller shops, they need a little more help, that kind of thing. So, yeah. And also the industry is constantly changing, as well as our weather. So next year, living with a scientist again, she can't predict what it's going to be, warmer or colder or average next year. You can get averages like for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, but that only goes so far. And it's like one of those things that, it's like you just kind of make the best judgment you can, but there is a lot more resources now to figure out those particular weather history points of your local areas, especially if you're moving somewhere and you're like, okay, what's the weather like there, and can I get a demographic? So if you're in riding, you can kind of feel the patterns of all that. Also, go to your local shops, your new location, or your current shops, and like, hey, when's the best time to ride, and when's the time I need to wear, warmer clothing and so forth. They're going to be more than happy to tell you, because most of those people are in the cycling industry, are really happy to be there because they love that particular sport, and that's why they're working there, because they don't get paid enough to, it's not like I'm gonna go to the cycling sport because it's like, the best paying jobs. No, it's a passion job, and you're gonna find more passionate people, and they're gonna be super happy to talk to you about certain things, especially keep you engaged in riding, and what their shop can help you do that, and figure out their club rides and that kind of thing if they have them, and so forth. So, weather, that's a really whirly thing, right? And when you're talking about demographics of like below the equator, like our friend in Australia, it's flipped. Oh yeah, I was going to talk about that too a little bit. It's like, what really was mind blower for me was, I was a young 20-year-old working in a bike shop with my parents, and I'm being exposed to, track rep, specialized rep, all those things. And it's just, you really kind of just like mindset of what you're doing. I was learning how to work on bikes and trying to get a grasp of this. And what blew my mind at the time is Florida, Texas, Arizona, their main season was in the wintertime. And it was too hot to ride in the summer. It was like, so being in Colorado, we're a little more consistent around the year, but then like really that opens the mind up. It's like, oh wow, that's interesting. So and then you kind of look at if you're going to go down to do rides of somewhere that's in warmer climates and so forth. So that's what a lot of people do. And being part of the ski industry, that was kind of interesting too. As a side note, is a lot of those like we carried Rosinal, Atomic, and a couple other brands, and the bigger companies, they would have like their rollout of their new products, and whatever didn't sell, or they had buybacks, which was very interesting. It was very interesting because they would wrap that all stuff up and send it down to Chile, South America. You're like, oh, wow, okay, so they have their demo programs or whatever, and they just grab all that inventory and just flip it down there, and they recoup their costs or whatever they put into it. It's like, wow, when you're looking at a global type of business, it is pretty amazing, that kind of thing. I got a couple questions here. Bike service down in Australia is around $100. Yeah, it's probably about the same here in US dollars. They'll have a teaser tune-up package. It's usually like 60 or 80 bucks. It's just kind of really just a glorified safety check kind of thing. And then they kind of upsell you on that. And all the shops have kind of different ways of doing their business. So give me a second here. So when you're looking at service and you're looking at a bike shop, so back in the day, let's go back in the 90s. So we had the general 3 packages, good, better, best kind of thing. And I think back then it was like 30 bucks. We would true your wheels, adjust your gears, air your tires, and that kind of thing, and just kind of go through it. That tune-up today is pretty much the same, but then they got the whole perspective of service riding, and that's not new. It's just always been around. Like, okay, well, your chain is pretty close, so we're going to call it. Oh, your cable is a little frayed here, we're going to call it. So their perspective is trying to replace as many parts that's needed, and it is a little kind of over the top sometimes. It depends how much leverage there is on that I'm not saying that from the big guys selling chains and so forth. It's the bike shops are like, okay, do you get a commission for every tire that you sell, or a chain you upsell, or a cassette? So it all depends, because I worked on a shop that was really commission based heavy, and that's where it's getting kind of like, you're kind of really pushing more than you really should. Could you get a little more life out of it? I've always tried to be a little more honest approach because I came from a mom and pop shop. We couldn't really do that to our customers back then. But today they got you there and they think you're like, oh, well, just do all these things. Yeah, I mean, in a way it's true, but when you look at my perspective and what I do, it's kind of interesting because if somebody has an older part, I can go find something on the used market and be fine, but bike shops don't look at used. They don't. They just look at their vendors of new and they push that. And that's what they work with. And that's their thing, right? So doing their diagnosis, your $100 tune, $80 to $100 tune-ups, that diagnosis, get a few things adjusted and so forth, which is probably about, I would say 80%, 60 to 80% of the bikes that roll in, depending where you're at. Then they have like the next tune-up where it's that plus taking things off, like a drivetrain clean, meaning taking your chain cassette off and cranks, derailleurs, put in an ultrasonic cleaner or a solvent tank to get all that stuff off of it, and then do a little more in-depth truing of the wheels. And then you have another tune-up that's kind of like an overhaul. Overhauls have kind of gone to the wayside because so many different bearing sets and different things. Back in the 90s, we would just take the hubs and the bearings and the cranks all apart and repack them. So since there's so many different things out there now over the years, it's kind of, I mean, they'll still do it, but they don't kind of tie it into the package anymore. If they do, it's very expensive, and there's a reason for that because they have to make sure they have all those parts. And it is kind of a lengthy thing, but they'll have like the a la carte kind of thing, like the one-off deals, and that's almost a better way to go sometimes is, do the drivetrain clean, but if they need only one cable replaced in housing, just pay for that extra one. But with bike shops, they'll have the tune-up, then they have all these extra things you need to do, like cables or wrap bars or something else. They'll add another labor to that on top of the part too. That's how they're trying to make their money. A lot of service departments, you're paying a little bit more, and it is validated to a level because they're paying those expertise employees to work on your bike, and they have to train them and provide benefits and all those things. So you're investing into the department and including the parts. It is more of an expensive route. It definitely is. If you find somebody kind of like me that does those kind of services, and I'm not selling chains and cassettes, and I do have some, and I don't really push it to as in a markup because that's not where I'm just looking for the labor component to it, and plus my overhead is way lower, so that really helps temper the price. So my pricing structure, as a gold nugget here or understanding, is about the same, but you get more of the tune-up parts of it for the same price. So basically, I'm not upselling you to change out that tire. I'm not upselling you. I just include it with the flat rate. Like, okay, I'll do all these other things. You bring in parts, I'll just do it on it. For me, it's a time thing. So it's kind of like, the mid-range tune-up, it takes me 3 hours to do. Well, it's not a 3-hour allotment. So whatever I do, it's like, I may not need to chew that wheel so much, so I'm just going to do something extra here. And for me, if it's easier to work on, I add more benefits to it. Like, I'll replace the cable on there. I'll just charge you for the cable, not for the labor to do it, because it fits in that window. So if you can find some, service people and some service departments like that too. So keep in mind, there's a lot of different services out there. And that's a good point too. Get back to the weather. I got to put back to the weather theme, right? When's a good time to have a tune-up done? I want to say in the peak of the season, because those mechanics are like fried. I mean, think about it. Like, truck rolled out the 24-hour service. Well, what kind of level of 24-hour tune-up you're going to get when it's in the peak of the season in July versus the dead of winter of January? Just common sense, right? That individual that's working on a bike in January is going to kind of take their time because I only have one tune-up today to work on, or maybe two. So I'm like, I'm just going to dink with this and work on it and give a little more added attention to it. So also for costs, another thing too is you'll see a whole bunch of discounts for us here in the States, in the colder states. Backtrack, not all the states, but the off season, let's go with that. During kind of towards the peak of the off season, especially if it's after Christmas, you'll see those $50 off a tuna package and those kinds of things, or 20% off of parts or whatever. And that's the opportunity time. It's a twofold. Number one, you get the discount, and second, they're not that busy, so they're going to take a little more time. And also, they have their A squad working on your stuff because the B or the C squad have been let go for off season, right? So it's one of those things like, you got your better team, you got time, and you got a discount. That's the best time to have those annual tune-ups done. But what if you're in a pinch, you need to get like a chain replaced or whatever and that kind of thing? They'll have those, maybe just get you going till the end of the season, then you'll pay, and then you'll come in for capitalize on that full tune-up. If you're an avid cyclist, you probably already figured that out. If you have a local shop that you like, you always wait for the coupon to come out in January. So those are some little gold nuggets that relate to service, and that actually relates to weather. And I'm sure down in Australia it's the same thing. And I'm sure they have the good, better, best profile on their tune-ups, and I'm especially sure if there's a Czech store down there. They will have that 20. I don't know if they're doing the 24-hour service down there. That was pretty bold for them. Being a bike company that is just cutting, they must have hired some people that have worked a lot of big service departments to kind of get insights on that, because that's a thing that you need to pull somebody that's been in that hot mess to understand that all the dynamics and what you need to give your team as tools is to make that be successful. Because you can't have a whole bunch of shops going, yeah, we advertise 24 hours. We have this big sign behind us that's like mounted to the wall. It's not just a poster. It's like a nice, point of purchase signage. Like a couple grand was put in just that one sign to be put up. And you're advertising 24 hours. You gotta have the staff, and you gotta have all those parts and stuff. And I'm sure they have little ways like, well, we gotta order that part, so we have to push it a day. That kind of thing as a excuse to push the can down the road when it gets too crazy. And of course, I've been on bikes that like same bike second day. You're like, oh, man, this thing is just kicking my butt because I can't. All these other things went wrong, and you order parts, and I got to do all these other extra things to make it right. It's all those things that are happening. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, service departments is definitely a seasonal thing. And also for skis and snowboards or off-season stuff, they'll have the beginning season kickoffs, because they're not technically, the mountains are not ready to have us up there until sometimes in November, sometimes December. So those shops that switch over to the winter stuff are doing it in October. And I've actually seen a couple up in what's the name of that? It's up in Wisconsin area. They're a big specialized dealer. But anyway, they also do a lot of snowboard stuff and skis. And I've already saw a lot of those sales going on. Also, I want to talk about that a little bit too. Quick side note, question in the chat. How about doing a home or garage bicycle mechanic course series? I'm kicking around ideas. Trying to see what that would look like. I mean, there's a plethora of resources already. I mean, Park Tools has great, my perspective or the niche or whatever maybe the need would be is like, maybe, you thought opening a bike shop would be fun. How do you dive into it? What's the scary and what you need to know and that kind of thing. And I might do some of a series on more of the industry kind of lead in. It's like, if you're an old mechanic, you want to do something as a side hustle. You don't want to do the velo Velo Fix thing and buy, or a Beeline and buy a whole van and do the whole driving around craziness, because that to me is just kind of a crazy concept. I mean, it's great for the customer, but that's really hard on the person that's doing it. So it's one of those things as maybe having a series of, hey, if you're interested in doing like a garage shop kind of thing, and some of those insights, where to get trained, because training is really not there anymore unless you're working in a shop and going through the ranks, which is, if you're a younger individual and want to get into cycling or the cycling industry, that's where the Trek and the Specialized stores are probably a good way to go up the ranks, because they'll provide the training and all that, and then you do get benefits, and then you get at some point you just want to do it yourself and not be part of that corporate world, which is it's definitely a thing. But you know, it is still a hard business. I'm going to be flat out honest. It's hard. It's 24/7. You're working. I mean, I don't go home and turn it off, because I walk up these steps and that's my living room. So it's always on and always going. But for me, I apparently love it so much. I love this abuse so much that I don't mind. You know, first thing I do when I get up at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, checking my emails, sending up videos, trying to figure out what I need to do the day, what bikes I need to work on. I'm always, in my head, I'm always behind. So it's tough. But if you're able to have basically it's a family thing. Because my wife, she very supportive, and you know, obviously her job is really good and she enjoys what she's doing and she gets all the benefits of that, and that carries for me to able to do this. So granted, it's not for everyone, and it's not easy, but it is for me. Being in it for so long, it's very passionate, rewarding, and I just love doing it. It's just you know, it's like that's a me thing. And you know, yeah, I put in, I can't even count how many hours I put in a week, because I'm like thinking late at night, looking for bikes to buy and working on bikes and dreaming about bikes and so forth. But that's my happy place, you know, and to get people out there and riding and doing some riding myself and getting my, just talk to my buddies that have been in the cycling industry and reaching out to this community that I just dived into last year called YouTube. And I'm like, hey, this is kind of cool. You know, I didn't know how warmly this will be received, but I have a lot of people that are like, hey, you know, mostly all good comments. And, you know, it's like, it's great. And there's a need for it. And I didn't think there'd be, you know, a need for it, and there is. So if you're thinking about that, and I've been thinking about other lists, because, you know, to be quite honest, there's only so many bikes I can do in a day. That's just it. So there's only so much I'm going to be able to do physically to work on bikes to produce. Will that fit into our financial needs? It does so far, but it's one of those things that the only way I can scale is to add more people, and that adds a lot more problems, which is something that I'm not sure if I'm really ready to dive into that. And then it goes to another time. I'm a little older. I'm kind of like, I just want to keep it kind of compact. So the scalable perspectives for me is maybe doing the YouTube thing a little bit more, providing clinics of that nature, or maybe workshops, who knows, or provide, you know, come up with products, you know, a little beeswax thing, or shifter covers or something, you know, or maybe a tool that I've been thinking about that I need to produce, that kind of thing. Or, you know, hey, you like these designs of the t-shirts, you know, right down below there's a shelf of customizable and that kind of thing. If you like them, that's great. Get a little bit of kickback and you get a shirt out of it and support the channel and what have you. So it's a win-win. So I'm always looking for win-win things. So anywho, yeah, great question. And seasonality to that, business is its own weather pattern. And it may not relate to weather at all. It's the demand, if you have the people that are needing it or wanting it. I can tell you right off the bat, there has been in the last 20 years a huge shortage of good mechanics. So if you worked in the shop and you have the skills and you have a niche that you want to try out, do it micro. I mean, I did it totally micro. I did a little test run one summer. I bought like 4 bikes, refurbished them. And my shop size here was like half of it. And this is the wall expanded in the tools, but I had some of the stuff. And basically I did have a lot of the same, but I decided to get nicer stuff. It's a write-off, so go for it. So I did a test, and the people that bought the bikes from me like, hey, I'll fit you to them. They're fully tuned up, they're ready to go, and all this. Like, boom, they were like ecstatic. So there's a huge need, and the people going to some person's garage to work on something, if you have this layout or something that shows professionalism, you're not going to have a problem. There's a more need than and all that. And I go into the Trek and Specialized stores, and I talk to the people there, and I tell them what I'm doing, and they're like, that's great. And they send me customers, because they're like, we don't have this, but we want to make them happy. At some point, they'll come back and then buy a Specialized from them, or whatever, or a Trek. So it's a give and take, and it's a community. And a lot of those employees in other shops, back in the 90s, there was a lot of kind of like, this is my shop, and I'm just going to take you out because sell more bikes or whatever. That's kind of gone away in a lot of sense when it comes to the employee level, because the employees, they switch companies, they switch teams, for their own personal benefit. But, and again, like I was talking about before, it's a cycling community, and it's also a cycling community within the bike shops themselves. So yeah, the service managers from competitive bike shops, they may actually be friends or be roommates. They go out and have a beer after work, and they talk about their shop or whatever. And and it's kind of funny because I can talk about this now in great length, because Lee's and Peloton, the 2 main shops in Fort Collins, the owners are very competitive, but both staffs have worked at both shops, so we all knew each other really well. It's kind of like, oh, hey Nick, how you doing? What's going on? And it was like, hey Tyson, how's the sales over at Peloton? I heard it's been doing pretty good. How you doing over there? And that kind of thing. It was that, it's kind of like we build the community, and we try to help people out, that kind of thing. And that's what it comes down to, is if you're in the cycling industry and if you're passionate about it and you really enjoy doing it, that's the place you're going to resonate with well, and that's where you're going to stick with for a long period of time, as much as you can, until life changes and you need to make more of the money. But now it is a possibility for working for Trek, Specialized, and Pond to have those avenues, where when I was in the big thick of it in the early 2000s, you hit the glass ceiling and you're done. I mean, there was nowhere else to go, unless you were going to be a rep, or work for Trek or Specialized or J&B Imports, where that as a rep. That was sometimes a hard push to jump over from being in a bike shop, and they didn't have very many positions. Nowadays, you can actually make a career of it. You can go up, and that's where I ended up at Big 5 Sporting Goods, because I made a career of it. I started off as a manager trainee, and then I went up the ranks and being trained as a general supervisor. When I left, I definitely hit all those barriers, knocked down those barriers, and even when I left, I still had opportunities to grow. And they were like, don't go. And I'm like, I'm done. I've done my 9 years, and I'm tired of working Christmases and every weekend. I'm ready for something different. And they respected that, of course. But it's one of those things, I still had opportunity, and I still probably have opportunity if I even want to go back there. Even though after all these years of like, hey, I'm back. No, not going to do that. If I don't have to. I do have nightmares about that, though, anyway. It's weird. It's I work hard. That's one of my drives. I work harder to stay out of certain things that didn't really enjoy doing as much. So that's a very big drive. But anywho, well, getting close to the top of the hour. My bladder only could last an hour anyway. I'm just kidding, older dude. But anyway, I got things to do, like everybody else. And you should too. If it's nice in your neighborhood, just go out there for a bike ride. If not, plan something this week. If it's, we had a little weather event here, and it's actually sun out today. I think I'll get my daughter on the back of the tag along, and we'll go through, go do a ride and have some fun and get out of your headspace. Also talking about headspace, what resonated with me last night, and I'm kind of a little crusty because I was up late and we went to a concert wife and I. It was a lot of fun. But what resonated was one of the singer, like the lead singer of the lead band, was playing, and he was like, he wanted to communicate to his community of like, you matter, right? And I can solely say that cycling has saved my life. Just the industry in itself has given me a direction, has given me a purpose, and not say it's for everybody, but it's one of those things where if you find something, and this is the gold nugget, is you find something that you resonate with and you enjoy doing, you're not clocking hours. You're just doing what you enjoy doing. I don't clock my hours. If I did, I'd probably scare the hell out of myself how many hours I put into this. And it's like pennies on an hour return. But at the end of the day, it warms my heart when I actually get somebody out there on a bike and they're just new into cycling and I've given them the best chance possible of getting into it. I know there needs to be a lot more of me's out there. So if you're one of those, try it out. It's not a big, huge financial lift. It's just a time thing, and you can start micro and baby step up. And if it's something, I did. I mean, I was doing software stuff before full time, and this is kind of like a side hustle. Then it got to a point where my wife's like, "You're much happier doing this. Do it." So if you have that community and family support, jump into it. It's kind of cold at first, not gonna lie. But once you get your feet wet and you start warming up, then at some point, I'm looking for the hot tub moment, but it's still around the corner. But anywho, if you're neck of the woods, have a great time. If you like the designs, down top, you can do all sorts of adjustments and whatever if you want to do that. Actually, my mother-in-law makes these, so the designs. She's a retired or pseudo-retired graphic person, so she gets a little kick too to help her out. So for her cycling addiction, as all of us do. Anyway, have a great day. Thank you for spending the time with me. And until next time, from the garage, have a wonderful day.